Thank you for inviting me. Let me start off by saying that in the last 4 years, I have witnessed the largest loss of property wealth experienced in my long-term experience of 40-some years as a real estate broker in the real estate industry that I've ever seen. To give you some numbers, to give you an idea of how this has impacted our county, impacted you locally, I'm showing that since 2008, Bullhead City residential has lost 53% of its total net assessed wealth as measured by the assessor. That's a huge number. If I was to tell you for the other cities, I'll tell you like Havasu, 46%, 51% Kingman. And that's the residential properties. If I was to go to vacant land, it's 57% for the county, 65% for Lake Havasu, 66% for Bullhead, and 30% for Kingman. If I was to go to commercial, commercial has seen a loss for Lake Havasu of 23%, Bullhead 25%, Kingman 26%. Now this is not saying that everybody experienced that exact number reduction over those period of years. I'm talking in the aggregate of the total assessed value. Some were less, some were more. But those are the numbers, and they are absolutely incredible. And that's a loss of wealth of people's retirement. Whatever their intentions were, they thought, hey, listen, I'm taken care of. You know, I always have this piece of property or that piece of property, and it's gone. I mean, it's wiped out equities across the board. We're literally starting all over again. A major issue has been land. Land saw huge speculative purchases back around between 6, 7, and even right up to the first part of 8. We have experienced, okay, in the last 2 years, more appeals than we have historically ever experienced. Those appeals amounted to over 10,700 this year, approximately the same for last year, when historically in the past, during normal times, we'd see appeals only about 1,800 a year. Of that 10,770, 8,700 was land. Of the 8,700, which was land, of those who appealed, 79%, almost 80% actually, received a reduction. Those reductions, on average, were about 36%, and that was only for this year. Let me tell you, a lot of people don't realize this, but before I send out values, I have to get approval by the Department of Revenue. They have to sign off on my values. Now, for the last few years, I have taken assessment levels down to 74%. That's been my target. That's been my goal. The reason being is this market was dropping at such a pace that I took it down to that number when the Department of Revenue wanted to see me at 82%. And they tried to hold my feet to the fire to do that. I took them down to the 74% because even at 74%, I was not keeping up with this downward trending market. And it's hard hitting 74% when you're at 73 and 72 and you're out of compliance with the Department of Revenue. So statistically, and I'm using statistics to value these properties, I'm talking about statistically, you can be here, you can be here, you can be here, and hopefully I was trying to center right on that 74%. As it was, Department of Revenue and I also have a disagreement as to, or differences in the way we address arriving at the final number. Right now, or just this last month, as of June 31, that's their cutoff date, June 31, for using sales going back 3 years to value and judge me by the values I'm going to mail out this next January for 2013, which is 2 years in advance. So and we have typically, we try to trend and use sales right up till December 31, because the date of appraisal is January 1 when we mail it out for 2013. And so we've tried to incorporate the true market decline, including the last 6 months, which they ignore. And they're cutting off, and the reason for doing this with us is that not every county is like us. They're not able to keep up with trending right up to the very end. So they want to treat us all equally. So we are forced to live what the other counties are capable of doing. What did this happen? This meant that land values went up 30% higher than we felt they should go up. Lake Havasu is a perfect example. We had forecasted a downward trend. They said, no, they forced us to increase them by 10%. So the values I sent out to Havasu were 10% higher than I felt they should be. But I had to. I told the Department of Revenue, I said, hey, put in writing, I want to be able to pass this around if I have to. You know, if you're going to sit there and force me to do these things. And they did. And bottom line is I've told people in the appeals process, hey, appeal, because they can't sit there and control me with what I do on an appeal. And we can sit there and go to the most recent numbers and help people. As with everything regarding property tax, you squeeze here and it pops out here. Somebody always pays. And a lot of that payout comes through what we call tax shifts. How do I explain a tax shift? Okay, the best way I like to explain it is there's, say, 6 people who sit down at a table and order a dinner, and one guy has to leave early. The remaining 5 decide, hey, we'll pick up his tab and split it amongst us. When they did that, they assumed his burden, and that in essence resulted in a shift of burden. And that's what we're really talking about here. And what the bill proposes to do is to lower the assessment levels of commercial property. And what, in fact, it does do that because it's implemented and signed into law now by the governor. So it lowers them from 20% to 18% over the next few years. Historically, years ago, it used to be 30%. Then it dropped to 25. And then about 6 years ago, legislation was passed to continue to reduce this in increments down to its current 20%. The thinking is that by doing this and lowering the tax burden for commercial properties, you will bring more jobs, there will be more commercial development, and this will be to the benefit of everyone. We'll have to wait and see if that does occur, because there's always a question of what does business do in these times with that excess money that it saves, and to what purpose do they put it? Yes, sir. Oh, his question was that it didn't kick in until 2016, and I don't believe that's true. I think it starts kicking in this next year, and it'll decrease in 0.5% increments over the next 4 years. At the same time, they're lowering the land assessment ratio from 16 to 15. Okay, you do this, you decrease net assessed values in the county. When you decrease net assessed values, if you're a fire department, say, that means you're going to get less revenue if you leave your tax rates the same. If you leave your tax rates the same, there is no tax shift. But if you raise your rate, just to keep up with keeping your budget level and even, you will experience a tax shift. And this will go to all classes of property. Now, recognizing this, the sponsors of the bill put in there that there will be an additional state aid to educational credit to be computed by the Department of Revenue. Right now, the state aid is computed based on formulas that have been legislated by the legislature, and it is computed by actually a finance officer that is supposedly done under the treasurer, but it's actually done by a finance officer in the county who has a spreadsheet. She enters in the numbers. I might add, we were told by the Department of Revenue to experience tax increases because the state aid sharing revenue was changed this last year at the legislature. It missed us, we didn't realize it. And so evidently, according to the Department of Revenue, that state aid contribution is decreasing for residential properties, meaning your taxes will be higher. It's not going to be a huge increase. I think they said about 5%. So we have that as a tax increase, and then we have that as a tax increase, and then we have this new computation that is be done by an entirely different entity, which is Department of Revenue, which is basically going to affect your primary property tax. Remember, your tax bill shows primary property taxes, it shows secondary property taxes. Your primary, the simple way to think of it is your primary usually is attributed to costs of government. Your secondary is what you yourself, maybe you didn't individually, but you yourself, the population, voted upon themselves, generally through the creation of taxing districts. And these taxing districts are created, but that doesn't mean they automatically start creating a tax on your bill. Many of these taxing districts are formulated and then never really get off the ground. They just sit there as a vehicle someday to be implemented. It will mean that there's upward pressure on the taxes you pay. It's not guaranteed right now because we don't know how each taxing entity is going to address the loss in revenue. But it is assumed they will at least raise rates to keep their current revenues in place. Havasu down to 52 foreclosures on the market. And we're seeing actually people coming in and in bidding wars, bidding them up, trying to pick them up. I think from what I'm perceiving of the various realtors in Bullhead and up in Kingman, they're starting to be a little bit brighter because people have finally reconciled themselves to lower prices and people who can afford are coming in and buying them. Does this mean we've hit the turnaround? My numbers haven't shown that yet. I am still showing a slight decrease for this year on all levels and all values and trending. Whether the Department of Revenue will allow me to recognize that, that'll be another battle, okay? But I have not seen the turnaround, and I am not sure that we're yet at the bottom. But we're not at the levels where we saw a few years ago, where I was seeing 25, 30% decreases all in 1 year. I mean, it was mind-boggling. I mean, the market came to a standstill. You had the people who had the properties listed who wanted to sell them, but they didn't want to sell them for less than what they paid for them. So they've had to wait this out until there's been a change in their circumstances to force them to come down to a level where they could actually compete with the foreclosures. Foreclosures were the market, and foreclosures are still determining the market. And I will tell you, I use foreclosures, sales, as bona fide sales. It used to be, and there's a lot of resistance in the state to do that, but I think when they compose a significant portion of your market, they should be recognized, and everybody else should be valued according to them. And that's Ron Nicholson's opinion, and that's my policy, and that's what we do. Okay? The fortunate thing from Mohave County is that we're not heavy duty and big commercial. So, I mean, what's the gain to a man who owns a small business building down here and also owns a house and other property? All he's going to see is, okay, I'm going to win on the commercial and I'm going to lose on my home and my other property, you see. But if you sit there and you have huge companies like APS, Maricopa County with its huge commercial, the impact is going to be quite severe. It's going to be very interesting.